want to explore the concept of ground rules and group contracts. And my first question to Chris is, what are they? Well, in your experience, what do we mean when we say ground rules or we say a group contract? Uh, what does that mean to you?
Uh, for me, it would be about how we're going to be together. Is kind of how I define it to my group. I say, when we're going to be here for the next 3 hours, how do we want to be together? What are the things we're going to want to do or remember to do as we're together? So I guess I like to start in that positive of, and some people just say, we're going to say, we could use the word rules. What are the rules we're going to follow when we're going to be together? And that would be the facilitator educator. So my idea of the types of educators in a group are instructor, teacher, facilitator. So the first thing I want to explore and see what my group will understand. Initially, I start with that question without giving them any other information. And if they struggle, then we go on to different types of educators and help them through that. But yeah, I just open it up to, what are some rules we want to start out with right now? And most people know what rules are. So that's how I would start. How about you?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of times, especially in the corporate world, where people step in with a lot of assumptions about what should be happening, what they want to happen. And so for me, setting out ground rules is about aligning expectations of how they treat each other, how they want to be treated. And it's going to come up at some point. If you're having a meaningful meeting, then these assumptions will be revealed at some point. If you take the time at the very start, you can get to the depth that you need much quicker. So for me, ground rules and group contract, whatever you want to call it, is you're aligning expectations for what's going to happen in the next little bit, whatever it's going to be.
Yeah. And I was, when I first got started, I was exposed to the adventure-based counseling Islands of Healing book, where they have the full value contract. And at that time, I was also working with underserved youth populations. So at the time, we'd call them at-risk kids. And they were younger. They were, most of them 10, 11, 12, in a away from home setting. So they came to us for a couple weeks at a time. And we were all somewhat interested in that full value contract. So we'd sit down with them and say, okay, we're going to make a full value contract. And initially, I struggled with that idea of what that, you can still hear me, right?
Just fine.
Yeah, because the Zoom thing is on your face, so I don't know then what shows up. Oh, I think we're still good.
Yeah.
So I struggled with that, how these kids don't understand what a contract is, much less helping to develop rules. So I think for me, you and I maybe have a little bit, your percentage of working with adults is probably higher than mine, and maybe my percentage of working with kids and youth are a little different. So it'll be a good conversation of how we approach those things. But you said, we want to know why we're here. Let's find out why we're here. And in that context, let's start developing some ways to, some rules, some ground rules, however you put that. But mine with kids it turned out we got away from the full value contract and went with, okay, when you're with other people, what makes those interactions worth being there? Or what makes it fun? What kids always understand, what makes, when you get together with people, what makes it fun for you to be with those people? And then that to me, I've found to be the easiest way to get started with kids, because then you don't have to say, well, we're going to create some norms and a full value contract, and they don't get that. But they do understand, when they're around people, what they like and what they don't like. So I think that's kind of what I've come around to, is approaching it that way with some different language than a contract.
What's interesting is with adults, I think there's the whole thing around, if I were to talk about, talk about creating a contract, full value contract, or talking even about rules, there's a lot of pushback with adults because they want to have more control over their environment and their situation. So when you come in, and oftentimes people will say, here are the ground rules, and if you tell them what they are, it's a little less effective. Now if you only have an hour or so, then you want to say, hey, can you guys agree to these 5 things, so that they do have some buy-in. But if you're with a group, or let's say I'm doing a full day workshop, or I'm even a multi-day workshop, I want to give the participants of that meeting control over how they're going to treat each other. So it turns into a conversation. And a matter of fact, even I think this works to a certain degree. You like the term ground rules. Others would say agreements or whatever. But because of the story behind ground rules, which is it comes directly from baseball and is still used in baseball. Back in the early days, when every town had a baseball team and they would go to another town, the fields weren't standard at all. So both teams would stand around home plate and agree on what the rules for these 2 teams for this day were going to be. If the ball's hit into a pasture and it goes into the bull's pen, who needs to go get it? Or it goes through Mr. Johnson's storefront window, who pays for it? All those things had to be worked out before you could play the game, so that you didn't have to stop the game in order to figure things out. And that's, to me, it's a good picture of what we're doing when we sit down at a meeting, or you're at one of my workshops or something like that. Just before we get going, so that we don't lose momentum in the middle of it, let's talk about how we're going to treat each other, and how I it usually comes off my tongue, goals and ground rules, because the way that I frame the conversation is, let's talk about if this is the perfect meeting, what's going to happen. We talk about what the group needs from it and what individuals need from it. And then we talk about, all right, what do we need from each other in order to best reach these goals that we set out?
Yeah, I like that. I like that. And I think you hit upon it for me, is that time constraint. So it will, even you're setting up ground rules, which I think that's cool. When I play games, I call them house rules, like different houses, wherever you are will have different fun adaptations or whatever. But based on the amount of time you have, you set aside so much time to create those things or to develop those things over time. Yeah, I like that. That's a good way to approach that. Some people, I think, I've met people who really want to do that full value contract, but they only have 3 hours to be together, and they spend a half an hour pulling a contract out of people so that then they can move on. And I don't know if that's the best use of time. And are there other ways? So it's cool that, putting stuff out there and giving people exposure to other kinds of ways to develop those things is good. So that's something we can kind of hopefully throw out there and give some ideas as well as we go along. That's cool. I like the history of ground rules. That's pretty cool. It makes sense.
And I was doing some research. I'm putting together some resources for small group leaders for one of my clients. And I noticed that they were talking about setting up ground rules for their group, but there wasn't any context to it. And the fear that I have is that especially with adult learners, if the facilitator or leader takes too much control, then that limits the buy-in from the participants. So if you just come up there I agree, if you're with each other for an hour one time, it doesn't make sense to spend half that time on ground rules. But it also, if you're only with them for an hour and you come in and say, this is how we're going to treat each other, here's the 5-finger contract, whatever it is, it can, especially for people like me, I push back at that and say, wait, those aren't my ground rules. Those aren't my rules. But if you come in and you say, let me offer these things, can you guys agree to these things? It gives them an opportunity, if they do have problems with it, to ask the question. So what might take, instead of a half-hour discussion or a 1-minute presentation, it's a 3 or 4 minute kind of negotiation.
Sure. Yeah, and you made that point of that buy-in. We call that the buy-in, and a lot of us believe that if they if they manage or develop that process and come up with those on their own, come up with the ground rules on their own, we believe they will have more buy-in. I push back with people. I love to ask them why they think that, anything in the team building field or the adventure ed field. I say, why do you think that? And I had an interesting conversation one point in time when I pushed back at someone saying, we'll let them create their norms or their contract. And then I said, well, okay, well, one of them usually is going to take the lead, and usually it's going to be one of those boisterous, outgoing, share their voice, I'm going to say even extroverted kind of people. How different is that from us being that person and helping them develop rules? Because does everyone buy in? How do we then check in to see if everybody buys into all those things that leader is guiding the group towards? Does everybody share their voice? So you're getting into that whole group dynamic of contribution, contributing to a task. Developing that contract is a task, just like anything we would give them as a team building exercise is a task. Are they ready to be able to fully participate and agree to those guidelines or rules that early on in the process? So that and it got to be a very heated conversation. Well, they're in control. Well, they, as you're meaning whole, some people are in control. Some people are managing the process, and they're kind of doing what we would be doing. So there's, and it's not, I don't have a preference either way. Every process has, has an outcome, and something happens, and we're all about that between point A and point B. So we can always work with that. My question is it just as, whether they control it or you control it or manage it, let's say manage, does it make a difference? And how do we know? We don't really know. So it's fun to find out how people, where they're wanting to be right, as you said, they want to control, they want to manage, they want to have that power, so to speak, to be able to guide the process. So it's fun to consider those things, even though we give them that, we empower them. We could use that word. We empower them to develop those things. Is it more? Are they more invested? Would be my question. Who knows?
And that's where I think you're not just, as the facilitator, you're not just saying, okay, you guys figure it out, and letting the external processors and the extroverts control that conversation. I think that's where you're managing the process, but you're letting them get control. And I don't know what the research is around kids. I know for adults, they call it andragogy, the importance of having input and influence into their own process. It's not about controlling the process, although most of us I would say have control issues and want that. But if they feel like they have input in the process, then they're more likely to buy in. And that's some of the adult learning research. You get into emotional intelligence, and when people feel like they're being heard, whether you agree with them or not, if they feel they've been heard, they're much more likely to respond and interact in positive ways. So it's not about giving over control. It's about getting the buy-in comes from feeling like they have some influence over their environment.
Yeah, and like you said, facilitating the process, where again the facilitator asks questions, and in the beginning, I was that pure facilitator where you never gave a solution, you never gave an idea, you never stepped. It was always the group process. I've since kind of adapted that a little bit, but while they're creating this, being a facilitator and asking things like, did everybody get a chance to share a thought? How do you know? Can I give you a tool, like Tom says? Yeah. Hey, what about a thumbs up tool? Is everybody, are we here? Are we here? Are we here? Kind of a thing. So providing, I love that idea Tom shares about tools. Can I give you a tool? So that may be that we don't let them just steamroll the rest of the group like some people might do. We offer those ideas of, hey, as a team, as a group, It's going to be, what do you think about, is it important for everybody to share their voice and share their opinion, share their ideas? Why do you think that would help you as a group? So then if they're coming to you for some sort of program, they're obviously there to learn and grow and do something different or change something or get to know each other. There's the objectives. John Dewey says the teacher is just as much a part of the group as the students. Why deny that group of people the benefit of your experience? Now, at the time, it was, I think there was a little bit more teacher influence, and the teacher is molding, and what do they call it? Enculturating. What is? Yeah, so there was probably some of that of, we don't want to let them stray too far. But now it's that idea of, yeah, we do have life experience, and can we ask the right questions? David Allen, I was just listening to David Allen, and his 1-minute capsulation was the idea about the best advice is not to tell people what to do, but to ask the right questions, kind of a thing. So I think that's what a facilitator is giving the group options and giving the group ideas and letting them control or be a major part of that process, but also giving them opportunities to learn things along the way. And that comes from someone with experience, whether they're in the group or not, because we know, in the group, some people are going to have all their different experiences, and others are going to take that lead. Others are going to sit back like normal. So, yeah, I like that. I like the idea that we are still there. We're not just stepping away and letting them do all the things that they did before, where that's might not be working for them.
Yeah, and so it goes back to coaching. So I do a lot of executive coaching, and when I first did it, coaching was telling. So you should do this, you should do this, and then I realized that I was fixing the problem I had when I was in their situation, and not even addressing what theirs was. So then it goes swings the total opposite direction of, I'm not going to tell you well, what do you think? What do you think? Well, and they push back and say, if I knew what I thought, I wouldn't be coming to you. So there's that happy medium in there of being able to offer. Tom Leahy is the Tom you're referring to, offer tools or whatever, or just saying, can I give you what I'm thinking? But not in such a way that it's blocking their approach. And my experience in the coaching and even in the group process stuff is, if you've set the right environment and you're asking the good clarification, what do you mean by that? And we'll get into, I think some of those clarifying questions are so important. But if you're setting that environment and you've tapped into their full thought process around what goals, guidelines, rules that they want to have for their group, that's when you can say, hey, can I offer something, because I think there's something missing here. More often than not, it's kind of interesting that we want to have fun, but they forget to talk about safety. And as a part of my role as facilitator is creating a safe environment, and if they don't have that as one of their ground rules, I will add it and step into that role of, this is something that we need to have here. But I don't think you shouldn't totally eliminate yourself from the process, but you need to be aware of your positional power, in even your authoritarian power of, your experiential power. I've got the experience, I have the position of facilitator, and not abuse that and steal from their learning.
Right. Yeah. I like that role, that, step into a role. Again, I talk about one of my big findings working with people for so long is those educators, again, like I mentioned, a facilitator is one. Stepping into that teacher role, now we offer suggestions. Here, when I work with groups for a long time, so you give a little affirmation about, what you've been doing. You've been doing this a lot. You've seen a lot of groups work. Here are a few things that I've seen them do. Any of those things appeal to you? Do you want to try something like that? So you're now stepping into a teacher advice, you would say coach. Even a coach is one of those three types of educators. They can facilitate, they can teach, they can instruct, because sometimes we just have to tell people This is the way we have to do it. Putting on a climbing harness, there's a right way to do it. We don't want them to, here, put on a harness and then explore that. As a facilitator, you don't want to just say, here, we have to have this safe. So we're going to tell you exactly how to put it on. So depending on, if you're a leader, you're one of those educators. So I think I like that role. You're stepping in. What was that word you used? Oh, there was a term you just used about your position in the group. What
Yeah,
did you?
but the idea about where you're, and I noticed that Sarah's watching right now, and she's doing a thesis on authority and power in the classroom and between students and teachers. And that's, where does your authority reside? Where does it come from? And when you're talking with, whether it's classroom or groups or whatever, there's different authority that you call on. Sometimes that power or that authority is given to you by merely your position. You have positional power over somebody.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's the fact that you are more knowledgeable, you have the education, and that gives you a certain sense of expertise. And then there's experiential power, because you've lived through it so many times. That's another source of power and authority.
Yeah.
And Sarah's
that's
probably going to get on my case because I'm using power and authority interchangeably, and that's part of what she wants to distinguish.
sure, of course. And then who gives you that? Is it do you give yourself? Some people give themselves that, like capital, like social capital, work capital. I've been here 20 years and you've only been here 2. What gives you the right to whatever?
Well, and
Right.
that's what it's getting at, is where do you get this authority?
Mm-hmm.
And it's, you get it from the position you're in, or you get it from your education, or you get it from your experience. And then it might be that you get it from your charisma, which is even more fuzzy.
Yeah. Well, in my experience, I have a personal experience of this, where I getting my master's degree at Mankato, I had an opportunity to be around Jasper Hunt, which is, if you don't, back, I'm gonna say back in the day. Oh my God, we're kind of old. Jasper Hunt wrote a book on ethics in the outdoor field, and he was a professor in Mankato, and I was only there for a semester, and I took a class with him, and it was a seminar class, and I really wanted to learn from him. I in my mind, okay, I paid some money, I'm going to learn from Jasper Hunt. And he came in, he would sit for 20 minutes. It was a 3-hour night class once a week. He'd sit for 20 minutes, talk a little bit, ask us questions, and then give us something to do, and then he was gone. And this happened the whole semester. That was his MO. That was a seminar class to him. He facilitated a process and then he left. I didn't get to learn anything from him. So for me, I was giving him the power of his, he had this knowledge I wanted, and my expectation was this. So it's where does that power and authority come from? What are the expectations of your group? When I'm working with kids, they really have no expectation. I'm an adult and I'm telling them what to do, is usually how they see it. When I'm working with an adult, when we set the ground rules in the context and they know why, you do the Simon Sinek why are we here? What is this about? And then you set up your ground rules and you go, then you become a facilitator of the process. Then maybe, hopefully they detach from you, not coming in to get ideas from you, but they're having their experience versus you going to them. And then you're the consultant coming in, you're hired to fix the problem. So I think finding out what all the expectations are from everybody, from the person coming in to the group that person is working with, what are those expectations? I think in reflective learning, they talk about, it's a book on processing. They talk about setting up the expectations of what is this experience, and what is not this experience. So everybody is on the same level of expectations. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to set up experiences for you to figure out how to work together in a certain situation. So, that power and authority, we got to get on the same line, I think.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's so important that you you don't just talk about how you're going to treat each other, but you have that goals discussion. What will be success for you? So if you had that discussion with your professor beforehand saying, my goal here is to tap into your experience and learn as much as I can. And if he pushes back and says, no, this is about you exploring your own learning, then your expectations will be aligned. It's not that you're meeting every expectation, but everybody will come to the table or leave the table with the same shared outcomes. And
Yeah,
I sometimes joke about, we're going to do goals here because if you showed up here and you think this is going to be about learning how to play chess, I need to align your expectations that you're not going to get that from this. So let's talk about what the perfect session is going to be for you.
right. Yeah, and it's all about expectations. It's about clearing up any. My favorite thing to do in the last few years is to ask people, give me a little rating, 1 to 5, what you've all been team building before, whatever that is to you, or whatever people told you, hey, we're going to go team building together. Give me an expectation, give me a number on how that was for you. 5 was average, it's been great. 4, 3, 2, 1. 1 is really, I don't think team building is worth anything. It's a waste of time. And then find out where they're at and find out what they've come in with, and those expectations of, that confirmation bias. If they already come in and say team building sucks and it's a waste of time, I'd rather be doing something else. Now they're going to find everything that is happening from that moment on to confirm the fact that team building is horrible. So I like to appeal to, okay, this is your experience. Can we set this experience aside at this moment in time? We're here for the next 6 hours. I'm going to ask you a couple questions. So you're setting up, and I'm actually helping, I don't say we're norming and setting rules and guidelines. We kind of, and experiential educators kind of hopefully kind of bring it in the back door, even though you're doing something on purpose. You don't have to say, here's what we're doing.
Yeah, unless you're training facilitators, they don't have to know that you are norming and that you are, you don't, all you're doing is you're getting it done. If you're training facilitators, then you can go back and say, this is why I did it. But ultimately, in a meeting, I'm not explaining why the process works or how it works. I am leading the process.
Right. Yeah. And as you're doing that, then I take my little index card. Oh, is that what you want to do today? And then I write that down. Okay, cool. Now I keep going. So it's not this, for me, setting up those guidelines and norms. What I've come to realize that works for me in that short-term setting is to kind of, I say, accidentally set it up where now I have this this set of index cards. I'm like, well, in the beginning you said this, and I come back to them. And, who agreed with this? Who didn't agree with this? Why didn't you say anything? So then it becomes to helping them, as we know, transference. We transfer how, if somebody says this is what we're going to do, why didn't anybody speak up? What's the underlying cause of not being comfortable talking to each other? And that becomes trust and setting up the safe environment. And so then you're giving them that experience of that personal feeling and emotion of, hey, we said is not usually true. Somebody said something and we didn't have the time, we didn't take the time, or we want to step across the line, or whatever it was, whatever we were feeling internally. Now you're hopefully giving them that takeaway of, yeah, we need a better process. Yeah. And then, hey, let's hire Chris back again to help us figure out a process, right? That's not the goal. But the idea is to make them aware of it, right?
Yeah, and that's if that's like if I'm hired to work on group process team building, then I have them have the discussion and then put a final draft of their ground rules on a piece of flip chart paper, and just to confirm, I don't say that it's a contract, but I say I want everybody to put your name on this, that you're agreeing to abide by and hold each other accountable. And then they're responsible for that document. And then if they leave it behind or whatever, it becomes a great object lesson just in that. But then when there's conflict that doesn't feel good, because I think conflict is essential in good group process. But if there's something wrong with it, we can go back to that document and deal with it. That's when I'm trying to get them to understand their process better. But when I'm leading a meeting that isn't, it's about another outcome. It's about, it's not, it has nothing to do with their group process. We're kind of trying to come up with a product, or we're doing strategic planning or stuff like that. Those ground rules are purely functional, and they're not about creating a lesson or anything. They're about how are we going to get through this process and have a good product and leave feeling confident in each other, so that we leave whole. And most of the time, you don't refer back to those the ground rules because you don't need to. They've been reminded and they're doing pretty good. But when it hits the fan and something goes sideways, they're there. And these ground rules were agreed to before any emotions and passion set in. And now you can go back to this, this place that you were before everything got a little bit fuzzy, and you can have a discussion about, did we follow these things? What went wrong? Why are we at where we're at? And it's purely a functional thing of, let's get through this so that we can get the results that we're looking for. And so it's not about, to me, ground rules aren't just about team building and group process. It's a functional tool to get you to where you want to go more effectively and efficiently.
Right. And I like that. I like that going, like you said, I love that. You don't always have to keep beating them with the ground rules, or you come back to them when you get when something happens, when an emotional situation comes up, when a disagreement comes up. Can we go back? Hey, here's a tool, like Tom Leahy would say, here's a tool. Let's go. Right now we're at an impasse. Let's go back to our ground rules to see if we are within the parameters of our ground rules, things we agree upon, and see if they can help us get through this impasse. And then I always like to take some time. You do that, and you, at some, with compromise and with moving forward, you get around through past the impasse, so you can move on at least at that point. I do like to take a little time and then say, okay, let's take a breath. And we're referring to Tom. Tom's one of our heroes.
Yeah.
Take a team breath. Okay, let's refocus. Sometimes I even move to a different place in the room, so there's the different energy. And then I say, are these ground rules still working? Is there anything we need to do when we move on? See how we use the ground rules as a tool. We come back to them. Is there anything we need to adapt or change? Because I think ground rules, I like them to be organic, and I like the group to understand that these are not set in stone. As a team, you can adjust these if they're not working, or if you need to add something, or now I'm feeling more comfortable sharing my voice. So now I can say, here's what I think. I'd like to see this in our group now. And does it fit in one that's already there? Do we need to add that? And how would that help the process? So if you take a little time, you're also giving them that tool of adapting, changing the agreement.
Yeah. So,
as Dave Allen would say, right? We're not really meeting these agreements. Let's agree to change the agreement and then move on from there.
Yeah. We recontracting, but oftentimes at the end of that initial discussion, I'll make a point of putting a comma rather than a period at the end, saying that this sentence isn't over yet, so we can continue to revisit it. I want to bring up Sarah. She put in here a question around, is there an expectation from people of team development, group development, or group bonding? And she's talking about a mismatch of expectations about outcomes. And then she puts it, companies like to do social bonding activities and label them as team development, and it's a mismatch. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there was, I think, I'm gonna. Here's a resource. It's on the On Team Building blog at chriscavert.com. I actually redid an article from Paul Cummings and Michelle Cummings about what are we doing? We doing team bonding, team building, team development. I think that was the language, and I think it was similar to what you just said. This was Sarah, right?
Yeah.
Sarah's question. So there's a reference if you want to go. I'm trying to promote that language, and that we talked about this earlier about expectations. What are you here for? If it's team bonding, define what that means and what you're going to do, then there's the expectation. If it's team building, Tom, uh, again, we love it. We love all standing on the shoulder of giants. He talks about the different kinds of programs: Energizer, discovery, practice, intervention. So if you know what kind of program you're running, Energizer is probably just that team bonding, right? Discovery is team building, I think, where we're discovering a little bit more about what we need to work on. And then practice, practicing skill development, I think is actually what the term is. Now, maybe that's more team development, where we're getting better at something so that we can be better as a group of people. So I think setting up the expectation, going to a baseball game as a team building experience, that's what they call it, team building. And I think as we got to figure out how to get this language out there so people understand the difference, so they're not confusing that team building and they come into an educational program where they're there to do some skill development, where it's more, then their expectation is their team bonding, and they only think they're going to have fun and just laugh and be competitive and then move on. Well, if they don't understand that expectation and you're driving something else, that's where the mismatch is, and that's where that confirmation bias is. This sucks because it's not meeting my expectations. So I think that comes around to back to what we were talking about, is completely getting an understanding of why they're there and what it's for, and deciding what kind of a program is, and making sure everybody is on the same page.
Yeah, and this gets interesting thing about the language that's used. And I don't know, having worked in businesses for a long time, they call everything team building. Everything is team building. And then it's my job as a consultant and facilitator to tease out of them what their expectations of outcomes are. I don't know that it's my responsibility to get them to use my language. I just need to know that I can deliver on my outcomes. It's like, I think about, I'm not a carpenter. So when you talk to me about screwdrivers, I think that there's maybe 2 or 3 different types. But if you talk to somebody who's a woodworker, man, they've got chests and toolboxes full of different screwdrivers and know which one to use in each context. If the person's building me a cabinet, I don't really care what he calls a screwdriver. I just want to get it done. And so to me, I try and be careful, because I love explaining myself, over explaining myself, and sharing the intricacies of what I know. But I found that when I'm hired by somebody to reach an outcome, they really don't care about the specific language that I use. They just want to make sure I get to that outcome. And it's up to me not to give them my definitions, but to understand what clearly they mean by success. And then how do I get them there?
Yeah. And you, this is, you have more experience, I think, in the adult world, where you're not going to, they're going to pay you a lot of money. You're not going to start nitpicking about semantics, right? I understand that completely.
Thank you. It's just, thank you for engaging me.
Yeah. Right, exactly. And I get it. I do get it. And, this is, that's that fine line of alienating someone, because now you're Mr. Know-it-all smarty pants. I'm in the realm more of with educators, and teachers ask for, hey, my kids, they just pick on each other all the time. And, so they want a program to help certain things. So then I think educators maybe get it. They want to know. I think educators want to learn. So I do spend more time where these are the kinds of things we can offer. I'm being honest about what can happen in the next 3 hours. We can maybe practice one thing. And these kinds of programs, if you just want to get all 60 kids together and have a little fun for 3 hours, this is the kind of a program it is. So next time when you're wanting a program, you'll know what to ask of your program people who you're contracting. So I think I get more into defining the kinds of things that we could do with groups. So I get there's when can you, and when maybe you shouldn't, if you want to keep the work or get the work. But then when you get, I think, and then when you get your group, then you're letting the group know, as we talked about, what are they there for, and being more specific about expectations. Then you do want to tell the group why you're there, and so they are along with you on, what are you offering, and then they're on line with you.
Yeah, and I think I think teachers in particular are also trying to gain facilitation skills. So if they can learn the language of the experts, they're going to be more capable in their education role. I'll do the same thing. Like if I'm facilitating a meeting that has business outcomes, all that kind of stuff, that's different. If I'm training leaders or people who are going to be leading meetings, I'm going to give them some of the whys behind these things and why should you call a baseball excursion something different than a challenge course experience, just to help them align their own expectation of what's going on. So yeah, it's not that I'm anti-semantics, but it's the context, exactly what you were saying about when is the right time and the wrong time to let people to pull back the curtain so that they can see into your brain and how you are working this meeting.
Cool. Well, just to check in, we're rolling into almost an hour. What do you think? Do we want to, at this point in time, maybe review a little bit about, just a little bit quick, you give how you like to set up guidelines and
Ground rules.
norms, just a quick caption of working with adults.
Mhm.
And then I'll do a quick 2 minutes on summary of how I work with kids. And then, we could always do a part 2. We could always answer more questions. If we put this video out on the timeline, hopefully there's more comments than we could do. Obviously, we could answer comments there as well. So what do you think of that idea? Or you got anything else you want to explore?
No, let's review it. And from my standpoint, because most of my work is done with adults in a business context, if I'm doing a workshop that's lengthy, I'll take the time to have the group define the ground rules. First of all, we talk about goals so that we know what we're all shooting for, and then I ask what's going to help you get there. Usually I frame the first part is, if this is the perfect workshop, the perfect meeting, the perfect conference, what are we walking away with? And then now that we've painted the target, we can talk about what do we need from each other in order to get there. And the whole point about both those conversations is to align expectations about outcomes and align expectations around behaviors. Now, if in a shorter context, if I've got let's say a 45-minute meeting that I'm leading or facilitating, I say this meeting is about, here's the agenda if there's multiple items, or at the end of this meeting, we need to have this. Everybody agree with that? Everybody, is that the right thing? Short discussion. If there's a problem with it, it could be, that's a great way to discover when you're having a meeting with the wrong group of people or at the wrong time. And then we talk about either if it's established group, we recall, hey, we've agreed to treat each other this way, or for this meeting, we'll talk about if this is about critical thinking and decision making and we're converging our thoughts, we have a certain set of ground rules there about how we work it. Or if it's divergent thinking, we need to come up with a lot of ideas out of this meeting. We talk about those set ground rules that we have.
Cool.
And it's all about increasing engagement in the meeting by giving people an opportunity to have influence over their environment.
So when you set up the goals, do you do anything prior to that? Or do you get your group together, introduce yourselves, grade high, do goals? What do you do anything before you set goals?
Well, it all depends on the context of the meeting. If this is an existing group, not usually. The most important thing that I can do is, if I've got the time, is get the agenda out early, have an agenda, and then get it out early so people, and encourage people to look at it and comment on it. If most of the time I try and do something that gets their input as soon as possible when the meeting, it's even, hey, morning. If they know me, then I don't have to introduce myself. Hey, I'm John Losey. I'm going to be facilitating your meeting today. What I want you to do is get up and greet each other this morning. Stand up, walk around, shake hands, just make eye contact. I had one executive group that had the tradition of fist bumps because that started when in flu season, nobody wanted to shake each other's hands. But as early as possible, getting them realizing that this is an interactive and active process, and it's not a passive meeting where you can sit back. I think, just like people have bad impressions of team building programs because of what they watched on sitcoms, and everybody makes the extreme example, and people have negative experiences mostly because they've had a less than stellar facilitator. Same thing with meetings. People don't like meetings mostly because they've never been one or led one that was effective.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Cool. I was curious on they're coming in. I like that. Having information. They're coming in with understanding the expectations of your gathering already.
Prime
And,
the
it, and
pump.
if you can't get them that information beforehand, then you would do a little bit of that. Here's what we're here for. Am I right? Am I correct? Am I making assumptions? So you're setting up the idea or the context of the meeting.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Yeah. For me with kids, um, I as I mentioned, I like to sneak it in there. I like to sneak the rules and guidelines in. My favorite question is, hey, when you're with people, when you're with a group of people playing a game in a classroom, on the playground, at home, what makes it fun to be together with those people? What makes it fun for you? What do you like about being together with people? And then, I do that quickly. I just get some ideas. I write down some notes, and then I like to play a little bit. I like to get them experiencing moving around. Kids like to get going and moving around. And then I say, oh yeah, you're really, you're right now, you're sharing ideas. And is everybody getting a chance to share ideas? Anybody had an idea that they didn't share? Ooh, how do we make sure everybody gets to share their ideas? So I kind of sneak it in as I go, and I'm keeping track. I'm writing it down on index cards. And then eventually, after 2 or 3 activities, now maybe I'll sit down and be a little more serious with a debrief and say, okay, here are some things you said. What's the most important right now? What can you all give me a thumbs up that I can try to do? And then we'll pick one, and then we'll do an activity, and we'll practice and make sure we focus on that. We front load. I'm not going to talk until it's my turn. Maybe that's going to be what we practice. So then we go and we do an activity, we do a planning, they get to talk, they get to communicate. So we're practicing one thing at a time. And then they're all aligned with whatever objectives they're coming in with. But to me, setting up ground rules, full value contracting, that's how I do it. I keep notes on cards. I put them out in the middle like an image card or processing card and say, what do you like? What are the things, what would you vote on that are the top ones right now? Oh, these are a good 3. Okay, let's go. Let's do something else and let's practice those. Yeah. So they know they're there to practice some things together as a group. They understand, hey, we're here together. We're going to learn some things. We're not just going to play games. There is some learning about it, but it's, we're not going to have a test. We're not going to, but we're going to tell each other what we're learning. That's what this experience is about. So that's my approach to setting up guidelines and rules. Or
I think it's so important that what you talked there about having this ongoing process. I've done this too often myself, but also I see people who use ground rules or contracting as a one-time event. This is what it is. Now we're going to move on. I see, there's such a great connection here in, group process models, because the needs of the group change as you go through different phases of your group. What the needs of the new forming group is different than when that group is actually moving through the storm or even functioning. And if you're not allowing your ground rules to adapt to the new phase, then they're going to become irrelevant and almost a negative if you don't allow that to be a living document.
Nice. Hey, and that may be, wow, that's an interesting lead in. Did you do that on purpose? Talking about the stages of group development, maybe that's a conversation we need to have down the line. That's something I'm still working on.
Aren't we all?
Yeah. Well, what do you think? Do you think this is good for now? I think there was some fun things we could give it a wrap and put it up there, and hopefully then we can keep an eye on it and look at comments there, and we can answer comments. You and I can talk about how we can do that separately or together, so that everybody gets, if something's on, we'll figure out the technology of it. But what do you think? You want to wrap it up and give it a little summary, and then you got the controls of the button?
Yeah, I think if you've lasted this long, or you just skipped ahead to the end or whatever it is, let us know what you thought about this process as we are stumbling through the technology and using it to help ourselves learn. What could we do if you're watching this? What topics do you want to do? What did we do well? Where did we miss things? Both for on the topic, because I think I saw some people on here who have definite insight from many different contexts, from athletic coaches to teachers to professionals. Love to hear what you have. Even some pastors on here. Love to hear what your thoughts were on the content, but also everybody give us some thoughts about this process that we did and this format that we did. So that's what we got. Chris, thank you so much for playing with me.
Oh, you're welcome, John. It was so fun. I'm now just very curious on how this all works. I actually figured out how to see Sarah's comments. So thanks, Sarah, if you're still with us. Thanks so much for joining us. And we're going to put this out there on the timeline. So hopefully we get more comments and some reactions to your comments, Sarah, and some other ideas. So cool. All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining.
Yeah, you can find Chris at fundoing.com and also teambuilderpowerups.com. Is that the...
Yeah, teambuilderpowerups.com is my online school. I have one online course so far, building more. So I'm trying to get some more professional development in the online context. ChrisCavert.com is actually where the On Team Building blog is. It's more, that's the theoretical talk about team building. And the fundoing.com is where we have activity resources for team builders. So all kinds of stuff out there, just trying to work and learn just like we are here, learning the technology. So find us over there. And John, you're going to tell us where to find you.
Yeah, I live in two worlds. One is I'm basically the outsourced professional leadership development programs for training directors who have great technical training, but want to do something better and different than off the shelf leadership and professional development programs. And that's the intowisdom.com stuff. And then I also do speaking, consulting, facilitating, and that's really, I love doing the program stuff, but I also love doing the facilitating and speaking stuff. And that's from Praxis Training. And you can get to both of those either through praxistraining.com or intowisdomgroup.com. And on there, you'll see my on-site store and just something that's coming up. If you're curious, I'm doing a webinar in a couple of weeks on the practical creative. And that's about how, if you want to be innovative, you have to be both creative, but it also has to land. So you've got to be practical. Practical creativity is the recipe for innovation. And I offer the 10 habits that the most practically creative people cultivate. So that's what's going on. Want to thank everybody. If you last this long, thank you. And let us know what you're thinking. So from the Shed, world headquarters of Praxis Training, thank you guys. And then Chris.
Oh yeah, thanks everybody. And I'm from Denver, Colorado at this point in time. So this is I'm going to call it my corner office. So thanks again for joining us. And hopefully you'll jump on more of these if John and I have figured this out, and we'll do a little more, have some other conversations. So we'll see you next time.